What I'm using as a kind of aid these days is what I call the cube. You recognize Rubik's cube, huh? But I have renamed it in Tom Haak's action cube. You can see it, Tom Haak's action cube. And so this is the action cube. And in fact, I can talk about each element in the cube for a long time. I won't do it today, but what I want to do is to outline some of the dimensions of the cube. The cube is, maybe the cube should have more dimensions than 3, but unfortunately there are only 3. And I will talk about 3 of the elements. One element is around the key enablers of HR. I will talk about them. Enablers to drive the impact of HR. Remember the green area. I will talk more extensively also about the trends, blue. What are the trends I see, we see, and how can you use them? And in a sense, the most important area is the yellow area. And that's around what are the issues we are trying to solve? What are our organizational business issues? And of course, this is the starting point. So it's something around what are our issues? I will talk about that. What are the trends? How can we use them to tackle the issues? But how can we also make sure that we have our enablers in order? Yeah, so a couple of dimensions. And I will start today with the enablers, because the enablers you will know, but they are kind of the foundation in a sense of effective HR today. And number 1 on the list of enablers is people analytics. Evidence-based, using data to make sure that you know what you're doing and that what you're doing is effective. That is one of the basics of HR today. And I say here people analytics, but also analytics for the people. In a sense, that's a side remark, but many organizations, they take very much an organizational point of view, but forget to think about what is in it for the people. And especially on the data side, that is important, that you take into account when you gather data, when you analyze data, that is not only how does the organization benefit, but also how do the people in the organization benefit from all of this. And that's a very critical element. And I gather a lot of data about myself. For example, with my Apple Watch, I track how I run, I track how I sleep, etc., etc. But it's my data. I use the data. And I would be very hesitant to share all that data with my employer if I had one. Luckily, I'm self-employed, so I don't have a boss. But what would he or she do with that data? I would be worried. But now it's clear the data is there for me. It helps me to stay healthy, to stay fit, etc. People analytics, one of the key enablers. The second one we know is HR technology. Increasingly, HR technology is one of the powerful, one of the key enablers of the HR profession. And we can talk a lot, also today we won't do it, what are critical elements and what are the possibilities to use HR tech. There it's not about replacing people with technology necessarily. In the HR domain, it has a lot to do with how can we as HR professionals use technology to do our work better. And there's a lot, the gap between what we could do and what we are doing today still is quite big. So we can use technology to increase our impact, to do our work a lot better. One simple example, and I might come back to it later, is in the whole area of recruitment and selection, which is important for many organizations. If we cleverly use technology, we can increase our search capabilities, when we can increase the quality of our selection in an enormous way. But unfortunately, still many organizations rely too much still on the human, how could you say, the human element, which is important, but especially, for example, in selections, we know that humans are not so good. The third, I call it an enabler. You can call it differently, but this has something to do with how do you approach HR, and that's an enabler. I see, and that's why the Rubik's Cube is a nice metaphor, because I see HR and HR leaders very much as HR architects. As an architect, you try to answer the question, we want to deal, we want to solve, we want to tackle important business issues. How can we do that? How do we build the interventions to tackle the issues? What are the most effective interventions? What do we do? What don't we do? So it's building, as an architect, a clever, you could say, building or a clever design of interventions, where it's always important to do things as minimum as possible. And you like to have a big impact with a small effort. That's ideal. And then you don't have to do a lot. Instead of doing a lot and no impact. That's the opposite. But you could say, well, you're laughing, but still many organizations, if I look at the HR teams, I see a lot of activity and relatively low impact. So as an architect, that's important. And holistic HR is that you design cleverly, that you don't say we have to do everything, but that you choose the effective projects and interventions. And that's an important element. If I look at many HR organizations where I come, often they want to do too much. They want to do everything. They want to implement the whole handbook of HR, and maybe that's not necessary. That's number 3 in the foundation. And the fourth element is, how do we work? And there today I say, well, the enabler is working in a combination of using agile methodologies. I'm sure you know that, in combination with design thinking. Those two together make that also, as HR architects, we are able to cleverly design experiments to be close to our customers, whether they are internal or external, and really try to find out what they need, how we can help them, design something, test it, rapid prototype, measure what works, what doesn't work, and so in quick iterations, make sure that we have a big impact. Well, that's easier said than done, but in the you could say in the tool set of HR, the ability to work in an agile way and the ability to apply design thinking are, in my mind, important. I'm sure that there's more elements in the foundation. I'm not talking about all the legal elements, etc. But for the moment, I stick to those 4. People analytics, HR tech, a holistic approach, and agile thinking and design thinking. So remember, that's just kind of the foundation, the green elements. Then I go to the trends, and I realize I can talk extensively about the trends. I picked out for today 10. It could be more, and I encourage you to study them more. I'll just give you a glimpse today, but on each of the trend areas we see there's a lot to say about. And I'm sure, important element here, I'm sure most of the trends are not new to you. And those trends are long-term trends. that have been going on for years. It's not that new trends appear every day. There's two things to say here. Unfortunately, in a way, the HR domain is relatively slow in using the trends and making, taking the benefits out of the trends. That's one. Luckily, you could say in the current crisis situation, that is, in fact, a world crisis. In that crisis situation, we see good news in a sense that the use of the trends is accelerated. So where maybe things were slow, some of the trends really are getting a boost in the current situation, and I'm sure you are seeing that as well. Number one on my list, blue. Back to the cube. I'm on the blue side. Blue, one is personalization. And those of you who have followed me a little bit longer know that generally that's high on my list. Personalization is a long-term trend. It's the trend from, you could say, one size fits all. We have to do something for everybody in the same way, to we are taking the individual needs, wishes, preferences, capabilities of people into account, and we take that into account in the way we work with people in our organization. That is not so easy. In the consumer domain, probably that's further and better developed. My supermarket, if I go to my supermarket, I use my, this is my bonus card. It's a little bit bettered, but and then I scan it, and my supermarket, which is called Albert Heijn, they know exactly what I'm buying. They use that data to tailor the offering to me. Every week they send me a little email, say, hey Tom, we have some good offers, especially for you. And of course, they try to lure me back into the supermarket. But I don't have to do anything. That's an element of personalization. But they use the data to try to find out what I want, what fits with me. Not, if you go from one size fits all, probably the next phase, and many organizations are in that next phase, is more segmentation. You divide, for example, the workforce in segments. That's nothing wrong with that, as long as it is data driven. And I see many segmentation efforts that are not data driven. For example, and I'm sure you use that as well, many people say, give me your date of birth, and then I know, then I think I can predict your behavior. Yes? And that's with the millennials. People say, if you're a millennial, oh, then here's the list. We know what millennials want. Yeah, but that's absolutely not true. So that's not data-driven segmentation. That is, anecdotal and not valid segmentation. So you should be very careful with that. People say, well, oh, Tom, you're an older man living in the suburbs. That's enough. Then we know what you want. To earn a lot of money and retire, probably. But and that's true. But so that's be careful with that. But sometimes it's based on data, then it's valid. Yes. But today you can go beyond segmentation to a more personalized approach. Why would you say Tom Haak is an older man if you can try to find out what Tom Haak individually wants and needs? Well, if you can do this, and also in the current COVID situation, for example, this is very powerful. What I saw in the last months is sometimes organizations reverting back, also pushed by government, to one size fits all. You've seen that as well. Probably not as strict as in other countries, but one size fits all. Everybody should work from home. Yeah. Everybody should do this and this and this. Well, for a moment that works, but now we see a lot of tension there because that's one size fits all. If you take a more personalized approach, you try to find out, for example, what is the personality of people? What is the work people have to do? Also, if you only know the personality, and on my site you can find a nice link to the how do you deal with COVID-19 crisis and your personality. But some people have a personality that is not so well suited for working alone from home. They like to be around people. They need other people for their stimulation. That's how they get their energy. So you can say to those people, work from home, but maybe it's better to find a way that those people connect to other people faster than introvert people like myself. I like it. So no need for me to go back to the office quickly. Now you see that starting to emerge. It's not only personality, of course, but also if you're home with young children and a partner who is demanding, well, it's very difficult to work from home. So clever organizations start to use that. Personalization. The connected to personalization is what we call customization. Customization is in the same book, but it's more asking people. Then you ask people what they want. Yeah. So personalization, you gather data, do analysis, and then you based on that data analysis, you adapt your offering. Customization is a little bit easier. Then you ask people, do you want A, B, or C? And then you apply that. But sometimes people don't know what they want. So that's one of the problems. Personalization. The second one, I'm looking at the time, I'll rush up. Speed. We know this. Speed is that things go faster is nothing new, long-term trend. But if you look in the HR domain, many things go still super slow. And we are not a profession that is known to be fast. Luckily, I already mentioned that in the current crisis, we have shown also at the profession that we can be fast if we are really pushed. Some organizations really manage to do an excellent job, for example, redirecting people to home and other, making sure there's online ways of communication, etc. But generally speaking, this is important. Can we do things faster? Yes. And that's in all processes. A famous process, which is always too slow, is the whole performance management process, which is in many organizations still very traditional, arranged around the year as a building block. And I won't go into it, but generally it doesn't work very well anywhere. Speed in measuring engagement or mood measurement. There you also see traditionally organizations that measured engagement did that once per year, once per 2 years with a super long questionnaire. Today, many organizations use pulse surveys more frequently, so they go faster. But there are also organizations that use real-time mood measurement, for example, by analyzing emails in the organization. So if you give companies, there are companies that you can give access to your emails, and then they analyze the emails, and out of that analysis, they can give you a view on how is the mood in the organization. A lot of things, but that is real-time mood measurement without asking people anything. And so that's super fast. And organizations that use it like it. Number 3, fun. Fun. The Netherlands is a super Calvinistic country, and there's still the kind of the spirit is work and fun are 2 different things. Yeah, work is serious, and you have to. Well, that is changing, but not so fast. I do many workshops in organizations in the past 6 years, and I sometimes do a quick trend scan. And then I ask the organizations, to what extent do you use this trend? The trends like I mentioned today. And then fun always scores low, surprisingly. Many organizations, oh yeah, that's not something that is high on our list. Yeah. Also in the current situation, again, there's fun. We are in a dead serious crisis. Why are you talking about fun? But at the same time, your interventions can be a lot better if they are more pleasant. Yeah. So the whole, and I said there also employee experience. X. And this is connected to the whole employee experience movement. Can we do things in a better way, in a more pleasant way? Well, luckily it's moving in the right direction. Number 4, sorry for the speed. Number 4 is a trend which is still a little bit, you could say, slow, but it's increasing. That is, let's be kind. And you might say, well, why do you need to say that? But, and I'm sure you sometimes recognize, in many organizations, especially if you look at the HR people, and you ask the employees, is HR kind? They say, well, not so kind. Yeah. And because they always say it's not possible. And yeah, if you want it, everybody wants it. And we'll look into it. And well, let's be kind. I know organizations, that's why it's on my list. I don't make it up. There are organizations that put this on number 1 on their HR values. They say, we want to be guided by, let's be kind. In our organization, that is the starting point. Let's be kind. So always take that as a starting point. Not what is the rules or what are the regulations, but what makes sense. How can we be kind? So I plead you to use that. Number 5, I rush a little bit because there's so much to say. Apologies for that. This is connected to the technology. I said technology is an enabler, but use it, and the trend is to use it, if in a sense you could say, to be more personalized. Many HR technology today, especially if you look, and I'm sure some of you have been involved in that, in implementing HR core systems. I won't mention names, but many of you will have a kind of core system. Those core systems generally start with the question, and they fly in the consultants, what are your processes? Because we need your standardized process, because otherwise we cannot put it in the machine. Yeah. Well, that is not very helpful, because you want more adaptive technologies, is that you use the technology to be a lot friendlier, in a sense you could say, to the users. And the users are different. I'll try to give a simple example. Performance management. If you have a performance management process, most of the systems, they say, this is the process. January goal setting, August mid-year review, December evaluation, and they program it in such a way that the users are, they are becoming part of the workflow. So in the morning, I open my computer, and the computer says, Tom, it's time for your review with Carla. Yeah. And I think, oh, Carla, not today. Maybe tomorrow. So, but the next day I open my computer, and again, and Tom, we warned you yesterday, I'm pushed in this workflow. I don't like it. And many people don't like that. They also should know by the data that in the end, I always do it. I always do it. Not at the moment. Maybe Carla, I postpone until the last moment, because, well, it's always terrible conversation with Carla. But I always do it. So if the machine knows that I always do it, you only have to give me one sign. Say, Tom, this is the process. Good luck. And we know that you will do it in the end. But there are other people, for example, newly appointed managers. If you're newly appointed managers, you don't know exactly what to do. So newly appointed managers will need more guidance, maybe a little training module, maybe some feedback in their first reviews. So more guidance for newly appointed managers. And that's using the technology to adapt it to the user and help the users to do their work better. Adaptive technologies, and that is nicely connected to learning in the flow of work. Learning in the flow of work. And learning in the flow of work is around how can you get as close as possible to the work people are doing, and then provide them with tailored learning modules that they can use at the moment when they really need it. And I'll give you an example of today. There is software. I don't have it installed, but that could follow what I'm doing at this moment. So it could follow my presentation. It would monitor my presentation and then start feeding me back suggestions. Say, Tom, talk a little bit slower. You're too fast. Tom, move a little bit less. Tom, you promised to ask Salome whether there were any questions. You have not done it yet. Hey, Salome, are there any questions?
Not yet, actually.
Not yet. Yeah, but you can imagine. So this is at least analyzing what I'm doing while I'm working and starting to give me help at the moment when I need it. Then afterwards, they have monitored the whole conversation. They could give me more thorough feedback. Say, well, you didn't ask any questions, but this was good. This could be better. They compare it to best-in-class presentations. It's really useful for me. Yeah. So with some imagination, the question is, can you imagine? How can you get as close as possible to the actual work people are doing instead of putting people in a classroom and saying, well, yeah, welcome in this class. We're going to teach you X, Y, Z. And often that's not, I see that a lot, for example, in induction programs. They gather all the new employees in a room and say, welcome in our introduction program. And then they pour a lot of information over those people. They often don't even ask the people, where do you come from and what can we learn from you? Most of the induction programs are very top-down, one size fits all. That's not learning in the flow of work. That's the opposite. I go to number 7. Number 7 is super relevant also these days. A tougher approach to diversity. Diversity and inclusion is high on the list, especially in countries like the Netherlands. It was more gender diversity. I don't know how it is in in Georgia. At the same time, we see, and I'll stick to the Netherlands, that in the Netherlands, most diversity and inclusion efforts are window dressing. They say we want to do things, there are some nice projects, but the reality is nothing is changing. That is, well, what is changing is that people don't take it any longer. They say, well, you've been talking about it for ages. But if we look, for example, at the boards of listed companies in the Netherlands, it's today still only 11% is female. And how is that possible? And I don't talk about people of color, but there it's even worse. But a tougher approach of diversity, that is getting higher on the list. We sense it every day. And there, again, one of the enablers is people analytics. People analytics can help a lot here. One example, quick example, is that I know of a company, a Swedish company, that measured meticulously everything around how do we deal with people in the organization, where are the differences? Gender, this was a gender-focused research. They, for example, found out that interviews, if I'm an interviewer of a company and I interview a female, then the interview on average lasts 15 minutes is 15 minutes shorter than if I interview a male. And why is that? They also looked at the verbatim, male, then the male feels a little bit more comfortable. We talk a little bit about football, we talk a bit whatever, cars, football, the usually men's stuff. And then I start the interview. But in those 15 minutes, the bias is already has hit me. While if the man is interviewing a female, he's a little bit more cautious. He's saying, oh, I better watch out. And he immediately starts with the formal interview. And, well, less chance that the woman is hired. They found those type of differences, and often quite big, in the whole process. And then you can take some measures. For example, hire more female recruiters, standardize the interview, very strict. and well, in the end, we know that blind interviewing is the best way to interview. Not many companies do that because that they find that very uncomfortable. But blind interviewing, no voice recognition, that is the best way, and that's the most fair way that's done. In fact, if people make audition for an orchestra, that's how it's done. You play your violin, but they can't see you. That's the fair way to look if someone is a good violin player, not how she look or he looks like, or whatever, or what his name is or her name. Is it okay if I go on for 5 minutes?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. So we are on the blue box. I hope you still know where we are. We are on the trends, the blue lines, and I'm at number 8, and there are 10, so it's okay. Number 8 is nudging. And you probably know what nudging is, but that's also super appropriate in the current time. Nudging is designing offices, designing interventions, designing whatever in such a way that you kind of invite people to show certain behavior. So it's nudging versus, you could say, instructing. Instruction is you should do this and you should do this. Nudging is you don't ask anything, but people are kind of naturally doing that. Well, I've seen interesting examples the last weeks in offices. You see offices, and I don't know how it looks in your office, but I've seen offices with a lot of forbidden signs. No entry. Keep a meter and a half distance. Don't do this. Don't. So that's the instruction. That's not nudging. But I've also seen offices where they have already redesigned the offices in a clever way. There's a more natural flow of walking. Well, people naturally take that flow. They have put new carpet in the offices in such a way that the desks are put on a black circle, on a dark circle carpet. Well, then people naturally take a distance. They don't enter the dark carpet. So they take a distance, and you don't have to say keep a meter and a half because they kind of naturally do it. So nudging, and it's applicable in many other domains, is around how can you invite people to show certain behavior. The famous, I'm sure this is a good book. It's an older book, but it's a good book of Laszlo Bock. He was at one time working in Google. Google is a good company that works a lot evidence-based. What they did, for example, was they split their canteens, restaurants in two. Half the restaurants, they made the plates smaller. So you had restaurants with big plates and restaurants with small plates. The consequence was that in the restaurants with the small plates, people ate less. Yeah. So you can say to people, you have to eat less, you have to eat less. You can also make the plates smaller, and then they eat less. And that's nudging. You don't force people to do it, but you invite them, more or less. You can say manipulate, but the good word is nudging. Yeah, sounds a lot more positive. Nudging. Well, there's a lot more to say. Then I go to number 9. 9 is inclusive leadership. That's also very interesting, also in the current times. We have seen already in the last months that organizations that work more with self-managed teams, that are not strictly hierarchical, but work with teams that manage themselves, they are able to survive a lot better than people where they wait for instructions. So and this is a long-term trend, there are today not many organizations are the strict hierarchies, and many organizations have other shapes. So in this movement, inclusive leadership, you can also say distributed leadership, companies that do that and have mastered that have a big advantage. People are not waiting for instructions. So this trend is also a trend that is being accelerated at this moment. Yeah, I'm still going to mention number 10. It's a 1 minute explanation, but this is about, in a sense, you could say, corporate and social responsibility. It has also to do with purpose, but the expectation of people, not only employees, but also society, is that organizations, that they take responsibility, not only for their own organization, but that they also take a responsibility for what is happening in society. Yes, and that's where you see employees expect it, employers are starting to do it. So you see companies taking a more responsible view and saying, and even these days in the whole racism debate, you see signs that companies cannot say we are staying away from that discussion. Even big companies, and whether they do it totally, of course, there's always a PR element in it. But big companies, for example, like Unilever and other companies, they stop advertising on Twitter and Facebook and all those social media. They say this is not an environment where we like our products to be positioned. So it's starting. We can say a lot about it, but it's good to take that into account. You have a responsibility as organizations for not only your employees, but also wider in society. So I mentioned, and I will come to an end. I talked about the enablers. I took 10 trends. Of course, that could be more, and those trends are not totally independent, but I took 10 out of the box. And then I just want to spend 1 minute on how are we going to use this? What are our issues? And of course, in the end, that's something you have to tell me, because you know your organizations and you know what your issues are. I just put a couple of ideas in the basket, but I'm sure you have many more. If I look at organizations these days, there are a couple of things I see recurring. One of those issues is around productivity. You could say it's productivity. You could call it differently. You could also say this is about how do we survive. So that's a little bit even more negatively. How do we survive? How do we add more value? How do we get back on track? For most organizations, that's one of the top issues on the list. Connected to that is number 2, innovation. How do we renew? How do we adapt to new organizations? The things we do don't longer work, so we have to renew and we have to find other ways to do it. That's also valid for the HR profession. So innovation was always on the list for many companies. It's become higher on the list. Number 3, and I'm sure you read about that as well, is about how can we build resilience, strengthen the resilience of the organization and the people in the organization. And we have seen that many organizations were hit in the current crisis. They were not prepared. Some of them are able to bounce back. Some of them will not survive, unfortunately. Resilience, in a way, you could say, is are we able to bounce back? There's another word, which is antifragility. Antifragility, and that's from a book from Nicolas Taleb. I'll show that as well. Some promotion for Taleb, but he's famous of his book, The Black Swan, older book, but also super relevant today. But this is the book I'm referring to, Antifragile. Antifragile is the question, where are the people and the organizations in a sense that come out of a crisis in a better way? So not only bounce back, but take advantage. And that's very interesting to think about that. But resilience, building resilience, is high on the list. And the fourth one is, and I already talked about it, is well-being. That has to do with, are our people safe? Do our people feel well? Can our people work in a good way? And not only our people on the payroll, but wider, our customers, our suppliers, all the people who are connected to the organization. And in the end, it's always about the clients. Are we doing the right thing for our clients? So well-being is high on the list as well. And now you can imagine, but I'm sure you have other topics on your list. So I just gave 4. I see a lot. There are other ones on the, and then you can start as the architect. What are our issues? Then you can, if you make a matrix, you can say, hey, for example, those 10 trends I mentioned, could we use those trends or one of those trends or 2 of those trends to tackle the issue? And I'm not recommending to use everything, but sometimes if you only think, for example, about personalization, there are ideas how you could do that. Learning in the flow of work. Hey, resilience. Could we do something? Learning in the flow of work and resilience. And the enablers, generally speaking, all the enablers I mentioned, yeah, you should use everywhere. So people analytics, don't do anything without good people analytics. Generally, HR tech, not everywhere, but you can use it. So these were some of the ingredients. I hope it made a little bit sense. If not, then, well, I have to adapt it. And I recommend you now to go back to the gallery view. So you can see everybody if they have their camera on. And I open the floor for questions, remarks, suggestions, whatever. Salome.
Dear Tom, thank you once again for super interesting speech. I have a question, not I, but our member, one of our members have this question. I will read it and then we can continue. So what to do if we have fun, try to be kind, have no processes identified and implemented, just work by the call of our instincts, and just now want to start collecting data, make data analysis, implement processes, implement HR tech, and etc. Should we go further without any fundamental issues or still need to start from the beginning? It was Nina's question. Thank you, Nina, for the question.
Yeah, I hope I understand it totally. If not, the starting point is the issues. That's the starting point. What are our most burning issues? Because if you don't start there, then you get lost very easily. Yes. So, and that also drives questions. One question is always where, let's take resilience as an example. The first question is, where do we stand? Do we know how resilient we are? Do we know something about the resilience of the people in our organizations? So then you ask a question. Can we find out? So then you maybe look in the data you have. If you don't have any data, then you have to find a way to collect the data. But the data, the people analytics, generally speaking, it helps enormously if that is driven by clever questions and not by let's collect a lot of data and see what we can see, because that's generally leads to, that's dangerous as well. Because if you have a big pool of data, you can always find something, but yeah, the question is, well, what do you do with it? So my plea is start always here. I also hear, and that's, I hear that a little bit in this question, but maybe I did not hear it right, that people say, we first have to get the basics right. First, we have to get the basics right, and then we can have a lot more impact. That is also dangerous reasoning, because I see many organizations that keep continuing to get the basics right and never are able to come to the question, how do we deal with the major issues? And then you see HR organizations that get disconnected from the organization, not only management, but also employees. Because then people are saying, what are they doing? Well, we are getting the basics right, but we have issues we want you to deal with. Yeah, but we first have to implement our system, and we first have to design the processes, and we first have to make sure everybody's, well, that can take a lot of time. So you have to be clever. And if you do things that are not connected to major issues, then the question is, of course, apart from compliance type of issues, why are you doing it? Is that an answer to the question?
Sorry.
My question is that an answer to the question? I don't know who asked the question, but you can open the microphones as well. Then people can respond themselves.
What if the issues are not trendy? This is the question of the question.
What if the issues are not
trendy?
No, the trendy has nothing to do with the issues. So the issues can be anything. Whether they are trendy or not, that's totally irrelevant. So they can be, generally the issues are connected to things like how can we grow, how can we cut costs, how can we enter new markets, how can we innovate. So those are the type of issues generally you find in organizations. I think trends are in a sense, you could say, of course, we can try to detect trends in the issues, but they don't have to be trendy. No.
May I add? Thank you for this comprehensive answer. I'm sure that during your huge experience of working in international organizations, I think you have the experience of working with developing countries too. So what can be your tip or recommendation in terms of Georgian reality? Of course, sometimes Georgian HR challenges and HR concerns are not in line with global HR trends or HR challenges. What can an individual HR professional or us as an association can do in order to influence trends or somehow be in line with global HR tendencies?
Yeah, and sometimes it's an advantage to have a short history in a sense, because then you don't have all this history. So then you can what we call leapfrog. You can jump. You can say, well, we don't have to do everything that other countries or other more advanced organizations did. We can jump. So one thing is, don't try to replicate or to copy what others are doing. So I'm not very much in favor of benchmarking. Benchmarking often is, what are others doing? But then you are already behind, because then you are replicating what others are doing. So best practices, benchmarking, I would say try to get away from that. Of course, you should look what other people are doing, get inspired, get ideas, but don't try to replicate what others are doing. What I see, not necessarily in some countries, but in smaller organizations, I come across many startups, scale-ups, or smaller organizations. What I often see there is that they too much want to replicate what big organizations are doing. And if they take, sometimes they take the decision, let's hire an HR manager, personnel manager from one of the big organizations and ask him or her to implement something here. That often goes wrong, because that person comes in and says, oh, this is a mess. We need more structure. We need a handbook. We need, and then you start on a road which is killing for small organizations. So it's a long answer, but it's don't benchmark. You can jump. And we know that, and then I go back to if you have a choice, I would put a lot of bets on analytics, because working data-driven, trying to find out. So my bets would be, make sure, if you want to make quick progress, that your enablers are in order, and that you are skilled in agile working and design thinking, because then you can have a lot more impact with a small team of people, that you use HR tech, and that you use people analytics. I think that would be my first advice, make sure that your enablers, that you use your enablers, but I always come back to the yellow side. Don't get disconnected, go to the yellow side. And there's a dimension I did not mention because it's too complicated, but you could say the red dimension is the HR practices. It's around recruitment and selection. It's about development. It's about organizational design. So there's a lot more. It's not 3, but this is our practices. Well, we would expect, and sometimes HR, and that's back to the architect, they jump too quick to one solution area. A typical area that is used too often, too quick, is learning and development. We have an issue, yeah, okay, we should train the people. Well, and we know that most of the learning and development efforts are not very effective. So choosing the right interventions is super important. And I see that, and then I will stop on this, but in smaller companies, what you see there is often that they are not strict enough, especially in selection. So what I see in smaller, fast-growing companies, that they are not very strict in selection. They say, well, we are growing fast, we don't know where to find the people. So they start hiring people that are not exactly meeting all the type of criteria. And that's a seed for terrible things. Because then, the quality goes down, there are issues. So if there's one advice, and that's the last advice in this answer, if you have a choice in terms of interventions you choose, well, the best intervention is to be very strict in your recruitment and selection process. Don't do any compromises there, but make sure it's data-driven and not gut feel-driven.
Mm-hmm.
But because if you have the right team, if you have the right people, then life becomes a lot more easier than if you have to amend things later. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Inspiring. Have another question. Thank you for that answer. As you mentioned, 10 HR trends based on your practice. Which one is more difficult to use practically? Thank you for the question.
Yeah. I think that's well, it's difficult to answer it very quickly, but it's an excellent question. Things that are closer to you and in your control, and I talk about HR, are a little bit easier to use than if you have to change the organization. So if I talk about inclusive leadership, although that is an important trend, it's not so easy to, from an HR point of view, to say, well, let's introduce inclusive leadership. Yeah, because that is super difficult. Yes. So inclusive leadership, probably not so easy. Also, generally, trends that are threatening for the top of the organization are more difficult to implement. Of course, inclusive leadership, if the CEO is a big boss, he said, well, yeah, inclusive leadership, that hurts me. Nudging is easier. That's in your control. Yeah. So easy nudging, learning in the flow of work. It's not easy, but it's easy to start with it, I would say. It's easy to start with learning in the flow of work because there's many solutions, and stop with your classroom training, many of the classroom. So that's relatively easy. Of course, be kind. Is super easy. Maybe not so easy to make everybody kind, but you can start at least with yourself. Speed, I don't know. It's proven in HR not to be so easy, but I think that's partly because we are hindering ourselves. So it's not a very coherent, and HR tech is relatively easy. If you find an area that really has an impact in your organization, and generally things that save money are easier to implement. Because then we can things do more cleverly, we can save money, we can hire better people at a then it's more then people will not object. So yeah, it's interesting. But start. Sorry it's sometimes I feel a little bit. But if you have a good story, how you can help to solve a major issue by using one of the trends, well, then you the green, then you are the king. If you do it in a clever, innovative way, and not saying, well, we should make a new handbook, or we should have more regulations, or we should do this and this and this. Sorry, not super concrete, but I will give it some more thought.
Probably it was inclusive leadership, as you mentioned, as it's not completely dependent on HR professionals. So quite interesting. I think if there's no other question, we can make a conclusion and say
super.
Your dear speaker and our dear members.
I have one question, Tom.
Sure.
You are always mentioning HR data in many aspects, like in analytics, in personalization, and so on and so forth. And I fully agree with you that HR data and data analyzing is super important for every organization in all the aspects, not only for the HR purposes, but in all the aspects. But no matter that COVID pushed and nudged organizations towards digitalization and automatization, still it seems to be quite expensive to implement new data systems, new softwares, new tools, and so on and so forth. Like for kind of our countries who are still in the process of development, and the automatization and digitalization is not so high. What is your recommendation? How organizations and how HRs can start collecting data, and what kind of tools they can use in terms of collecting this data for analyzing purposes? Still, I have to emphasize that digitalization is very low in developing countries. Thank you.
But the but is, I don't think necessarily you have to adapt. You have to adapt to the situation where you're in. And if only you have Excel and email, for example, you can already do quite a lot. And if you have Excel, email, and some kind of rudimentary data elements, most of the time you have something about people. You know who are employed. You have some basic data around how long do we employ people. So generally you have something. Because you need it for legal purposes, you need it in the contracts of people. And then with, if you ask the right questions, so again, go back to your questions, then with the data you have, maybe ask some additional data, but sometimes you can use a questionnaire. For example, I saw a relatively simple questionnaire around asking people working from home, in the current situation, how can we help you in the best possible way? How can we help you in the best possible way? That was just one question via email, and they gathered the data, and then they said, okay, well, this is data we have collected, and now we can have more targeted action because we know better what people need. and that is not, that doesn't necessarily cost a lot of money. It will probably save a lot of money. I know a company that has a weekly mood survey, but they do it with using SurveyMonkey. They ask 2 questions. One question is a net promoter score question. So how would you recommend our company as an employer to your friends and family on a 10-point scale? You know the net promoter score. Second, what can we do better? So they just ask every week to all the employees, and this is a company with about 250 people. They ask those 2 questions via SurveyMonkey. They also know a little bit where people are in the organization, but if you don't know it, you can ask it. What is your department? And then with that simple way, they gather data, and they are also over time able to see trends. So I think you can, with some clever, even if you have no money, you can cleverly gather data and analyze it. But you have to also be careful that you do it in a sound methodological way, because it's also quite easy to misuse data and to draw the wrong conclusions, etc.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah. I've got another question regarding evaluation. You mentioned in several aspects,
Yeah.
feedback and the live feedback and continuing feedback and so on. It becomes very trendy, instead of having like evaluation processes and so on, as you mentioned, to have live feedback system. Like when you measure mood of your employees and so on and so forth. But there is another side, black side of these systems. Many people feel that they are annoyed because of this live like giving and ask, that they are asked to give feedbacks every day and several times in a day and so on and so forth. What do you what is your suggestion, and what do you recommend to HRs? What kind of live feedback systems they should use, and in what way? Thank you.
And I will try to answer it briefly. I think it's important to make a good distinction between processes. Why are you doing it? Yes. And it's one side, it's very good to have a cut between we want to help people to do their job better. That's kind of, you could say, performance consulting. We want to help people to do their job better. Well, for that, you need feedback. You need feedback around people. You need feedback with people. Often you need very detailed feedback, because without detailed feedback, you are not able to help people and teams. As long as the purpose is clear, that can work. And as long, back to personalization, well, yeah, if there are people who don't want to be helped, yeah, then the question is, why would you focus on those people? So I would, if people don't want to answer a survey weekly, I would say, well, yeah, don't force them to do that. So work with the people who want things. One process is performance consulting, helping people to become better. Another element is, in a sense, you could say, performance management. Goal, we need to do something together in our organization. We have to make sure that we are aligned, that everybody knows what to do, that teams know what to do, that we know where people stand. That is a very legitimate process that you have to do. And that is absolutely not mandatory, because that's essential for the so that the process of goal setting, goal employment, getting feedback on, hey, where do you stand this week? Did you do what we agreed you would do? How can I help you to reach your goals? So that's the whole goal setting, performance management element. But it's a different process. It's different from I help you to become better. And if you connect the two too much, they become also threatening. Because then you say, well, yeah, what are you doing? Are you here, Tom, to evaluate me and to connect your evaluation to my pay increase? Or you say that you're here to help me, but what I sense is you're here to maybe even to punish me or to rate me. So I think, and that's a traditional view, but it helps to split the processes. Performance management goal setting and coaching, performance consulting, coaching, however you call it, and then adapt it to, and that's back to personalization. Don't do it in one size fits all, because some people, they don't want feedback every week. And they say, well, I'm in this job, I know my strengths and weaknesses, so don't bother me too much. And you can say, well, yeah, but that's our system, weekly feedback. And maybe then it's back to personalization and the adaptive technologies. Work with the people who want something and maybe don't with others. All right.
Great.
We have to look at the time. So I enjoyed talking to you. I hope it was worthwhile. Give some feedback to the organization committee, I would say, and then we can do it in another way or a different way or whatever way going forward. And this, I see this as the start of something, not the end. So I hope to see you again sometime, someplace.